All right, let's talk about a huge mistake in IT. One that looks incredibly smart on paper, but can turn into an absolute career ending disaster. It's really a cautionary tale about the massive cost of playing it safe with your hardware, especially now with AI barreling towards us at full speed. I mean, wow. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? A decision that looked totally responsible on a spreadsheet ended up being a catastrophic mistake. So, what exactly was that decision, and how could something that seemed so prudent go so wrong? Let's dig in. So, our story starts with a CIO who's in a spot that, a lot of us have been in. Budgets are tight, the board is demanding some serious cost control, and he thinks he's making the right call, a really safe bet for the company's bottom line. So, what did this prudent refresh actually involve? Well, on the surface, it's pretty standard stuff, right? We're talking rack servers without those powerful GPUs you need for AI, or the super fast NVMe storage that modern apps just devour. Network switches built for the kind of traffic you had years ago. Laptops with just good enough processors and, a pretty modest 8 to 16 gigs of RAM. But here's the kicker, the fatal flaw. There was zero plan for the coming wave of AI and edge computing. On a spreadsheet, it looked like a huge win for the budget. But here's the thing about technology, and especially about AI, it doesn't really care about your 3-year hardware refresh cycle. The real price of buying tech for yesterday becomes painfully obvious when the demands of tomorrow show up way ahead of schedule. And this timeline shows just how fast that safe decision can completely unravel. In just 1 year, brand new demands start popping up. Things like AI copilots, real-time analytics. The old infrastructure just can't handle it. You start seeing network lag, and worse, the cloud bills start to skyrocket. Then comes year 2. The company goes out and buys all this exciting new AI software, but it runs terribly because the hardware is holding it back. And then, boom, year 3. The breaking point. The hardware that should have lasted for years has to be ripped out and replaced, completely destroying the budget. This really drives home that painful gap between what you spent and what you actually got. The company paid for these powerful AI security tools, but the weak CPUs and non-existent GPUs in the hardware meant they couldn't run them effectively. They bought advanced analytics platforms, but the slow storage created massive bottlenecks. I mean, basically every new piece of software was being strangled by the old hardware. It's like they were paying for a garage full of Ferraris, but were forced to drive them at the speed of a bicycle. And the cost? It wasn't just financial, though. Man, that part was brutal. They had to replace servers years early, refresh laptops before they were even fully paid for, and add a ton of unbudgeted gear. But honestly, that last point, that's the real killer. Losing credibility with the board. You just can't put a price on that. Trust was completely broken. So this brings us to the absolute core lesson of this entire story. The real problem wasn't a faulty server or a bad piece of networking gear. No, it was something much deeper. It's a really critical question, right? And the answer, it might actually surprise you. Because here's the thing, the hardware itself wasn't defective. The servers turned on, the network moved data around. This was not a technology failure. It was an architecture failure. The entire approach, the very blueprint for the company's tech foundation, was just flawed from the very beginning because it was designed looking backwards, not forwards. And this really gets at the two competing mindsets. The CIO saw this refresh as just a procurement event. How do we optimize for today's costs? It's a very short-term view. The correct approach is to see it as building an architectural foundation, designing for tomorrow's reality and for long-term value. That's a strategic view. Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem. Now let's talk about the solution. What does a future-proof plan actually look like? The very first thing you have to internalize is that any hardware refresh you approve today isn't just a purchase for this year. You are quietly making a decision that is going to affect your business for the next 3, 5, maybe even 10 years. The stakes are really that high. So for servers, what does buying correctly really mean? Well, it means you have to assume a few things. First, assume AI is going to run everywhere, not just in some data center far away. Second, build on ultra-fast storage and design your network for massive amounts of data flowing between your systems. That's that east-west traffic. And this is huge. Measure your return on investment not by the initial price tag, but by how much expensive cloud computing you avoid down the line. And this thinking extends way beyond the data center. The laptops on everyone's desk, they are now critical pieces of your computing infrastructure. They need enough horsepower to run AI tools locally. So that means 16 gigs of RAM is the absolute floor, not the ceiling. And you have to start looking for chips that have those dedicated AI processors, the NPUs. Laptops aren't just windows to the cloud anymore. They are an active part of your computing power. Man, this quote from the source material just nails it. Every single dollar you think you're saving by underpowering your hardware today, well, it just becomes a tax that you have to pay over and over and over again in lost productivity, spiraling cloud costs, and eventually a forced, painful replacement. So let's bring this all home. This isn't just a story about some hypothetical CIO. This is about your next budget cycle, your next hardware renewal, your next big strategic decision. And for all the leaders watching, why does this matter so much? Because when the infrastructure can't keep up, guess who takes the blame? IT does. The board doesn't hear hardware limitation. What they hear is strategy gap. They see failed AI projects, and they wonder why you weren't planning for the future. The consequences aren't just technical, they're absolutely career-defining. And it's so important to get this right. This is not an argument for bigger budgets or just buying the most expensive gear you can find. Future-proofing isn't about buying more. It's about buying correctly, making smart, strategic choices that line up with where the entire industry is obviously heading. So, this all comes down to one single question. As you plan your next major IT investment, you have to ask yourself, is this purchase an enabler for our future? Or is it just setting us up for a really painful redo in 3 years? The choice is yours.